This is the single most impressive graphical leap that I've seen. It's a generational leap, really. You may have seen my video on real-time ray-traced reflections, which are impressive, but this is a whole nother ballgame. For years, developers have had to fake lighting and its effects as a careful smoke and mirrors approximation of how it would look in real life. And that's what makes RTX so impressive here, because this is not a carefully tailored smoke and mirror trick to approximate realism. This is real-time ray-traced global illumination that accurately simulates the properties of light. This changes the entire game. It's not an effect you'll only see in certain places, it affects everything. Areas that would have been shrouded in shadow with RTX off, because of static, inaccurate lighting, are softly, realistically illuminated with RTX on. Anyway, seeing is believing, so I'm going to show you why it's such a game changer. Some of these features might surprise you, but first I'd like to thank NVIDIA for sponsoring this video and sending me an RTX 2080 Ti. If you'd like more information on the 2080 Ti, I've got a link below in the description. Everything you're seeing is on a single 2080 Ti that hasn't been overclocked. And this feels like something I should be seeing in a tech demo, but it's the real deal. No compromises, and that is very important to me when it comes to graphics. At 1440p, I was able to get well over 60 FPS with RTX on and almost everything at max settings. Not only that, but thanks to DLSS, I've been running at 4K with maximum settings including RTX at a pretty solid 60 FPS. And that's good, because after playing with it on, I'd rather not go back to the old lighting. RTX Reflections is a lot easier to picture than RTX Global Illumination. Without even realizing it, some of you are probably picturing shadows when you hear ray-traced lighting. And shadows are certainly affected, but you would be undervaluing what this new lighting system can do. I didn't expect RTX lighting to make such a difference that it feels like we have RTX materials, and this is just one facet. Right now, RTX comes in three forms: reflections, global illumination, and shadows. I've already gone over RTX reflections in another video, so let's see why RTX lighting is such a game changer. After playing with RTX on for a couple of hours, I started revisiting areas with RTX off, and I was surprised at just how thoroughly RTX lighting changes the game world. It was kind of crazy to see rich and complex scenes like this dimly lit train suddenly look dull, even though it's beautifully modeled. Subtle, realistic, indirect lighting would change to an accurately even. The surfaces sunlight bounced off of would no longer carry color hues, leaving a flat, unfinished look. The materials themselves looked less realistic and lost detail. Metro Exodus is obviously a game made with passion. It's filled with detail. Snow actually builds up on objects as it falls during the night and then melts off during the day. The dynamic weather system is gorgeous, and there's a tangibility to the world that gives genuine immersion, but RTX brings it to the next level. What makes real-time ray-traced global illumination a game changer is that it actually mirrors properties of light in the real world. It's a realistic depth that normal light systems can't replicate. Everything is improved. It even feels like textures are different because every crack, crevice, and imperfection is manipulated by the light thanks to bump maps. Angles, surfaces, light spills across all of them realistically. Like I said, it's not just certain areas, it's everything. Some of these effects are subtle, some aren't, but together they all build toward a much stronger environment. But what really surprised me the most was how important color is for realistic environment. You can see the light bouncing off of sand and reflecting onto the stones, carrying the hue of the environment with it. That's an obvious example, but this also happens on a much larger scale. Materials are also more accurate. There's a more accurate distinction between dry and wet dirt, for example. Rust on metal is more pitted and gritty depending on the sun's angle. Even icicles have a whole new level of clarity, and the snow is more realistic. Skin is more natural and less flat, as is the fabric of clothes. With standard global illumination, the overall image is duller and simpler. Some of the light and the shadows settle in the wrong areas, as it's not truly dynamic. As I said earlier, for years developers have had to fake all of these lighting effects to approximate what it would look like in real life. And that's very difficult to do on a large scale, such as an open world game with a day-night cycle. This also affects gameplay. Some interiors have very little lighting and thus realistic levels of darkness, which makes your flashlight quite useful. Turning RTX off feels like I'm boosting the gamma until the shadows get all milky. And the sun finally doesn't work like flipping a light switch. When it's dark, but when it's twilight, that time between day and night, you gradually lose light. This is why real-time ray tracing is the future. Game models and textures are already realistic enough where they, especially polygons, aren't the bottleneck for realism. Let's dig up an image as old as Beethoven himself. It's easy to picture more realistic graphics as more polygons. After all, it's one of the reasons games look so different today. But diminishing returns aside, materials and lighting are far more impactful. Lighting especially, it affects shadows, materials, depth, color, and gameplay. If you want an example of how important lighting is, take a look at how it changes this woman's face. And this is just an example of angles, not even realistic versus non-realistic lighting. With RTX, the angle of light changes a lot, of course, but also so much more. Like indirect lighting, which I touched on earlier. Light isn't very binary, it can travel indirectly. In layman's terms, in real life, when light hits surfaces, some of that light is reflected off of the surface, even carrying color hues. Light can even bounce from multiple surfaces to illuminate areas otherwise hidden from the sun, becoming softer and fainter as it does so. It bounces off materials like wood, snow, metal, or sand in different ways, carrying different intensities with different hues depending on what material the light hits. Water isn't nearly as reflective as sand with brightness or color. Go figure. All of these variables come together for a very rich and complex scene. Without RTX, it's approximated. Without getting into the minutia, you have lighting that's very binary and very rigid. Shadow and light generally is or isn't. To make more realistic graphics, developers had to carefully sculpt scenes to work around these weak points. Up until this point, lighting has been a carefully orchestrated trick. Real-time ray tracing and its AI are the future of graphics. And not just realism, my personal favorite. It's something that elevates any art style. Pixar has been using ray tracing for over a decade. Quite literally, it just brings things to life. Honestly, it's going to be tough to go back to non-RTX games and console exclusives after this. It's not just a higher resolution or more polygons anymore. I've seen and played the future, and I can't just forget that. I wouldn't want to go back to the old lighting system after playing a game with RTX. Unlike Reflections, RTX lighting affects the visuals every second that you're playing, so I am very much looking forward to the future. When you think about the fact that RTX is already such a night and day difference when the tech is brand new, they haven't even scratched the surface of its implementation yet, so I have no idea what's coming, but I'm looking forward to it. And I'm very satisfied that RTX doesn't need compromises. You can run well over 60 FPS on high settings and a solid 60 FPS at maximum settings and 4K using DLSS. And I've always liked the fact that you don't need a special display for RTX like you do with HDR, although I'm sure RTX and HDR combined look incredible. In any case, I hope you guys found this video helpful or informative, and I'd like to thank NVIDIA again once more for sponsoring this video and giving me a 2080 Ti. If you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and until next time, game massively.